this lesson of chord piano is fun. We are going to start with the very basics. This is your first lesson. I'm going to talk about scales. And scales is basically, a scale is it's a ladder of notes. That's what scale means. And you've probably heard this before or seen this. This is the C major scale. And we are going to learn how to build a major scale, because the major scales are the most important, and they're scales from which all other scales can be built. And once we learn to understand scales, then we're going to be able to understand what music is all about. Now you have major scales, which sound happy like that, and you have minor scales, which sound somewhat sad. Now the thing is with the major scales and minor scales, most scales, not all of them, but they consist of 8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they start on one note, in this case it's C, and they end on C, the octave of C. So we are going to start with the notes of the C major scale to find out how to find a secret formula. And once we find that formula, we can build any other scale. And the reason that's important is because we know this is the C scale, and it's just all the white notes. But you have scales that include black notes in them. So I'm going to show you why those black notes are included. So basically we're going to start with the C scale. So the first note of the scale is C, which is why it's called the C scale. And when you talk about something being written in the key of something, like something's written in the key of C, that means it's taking the notes, the song is taking the notes from that particular scale. So if something's written in the C scale, or written in the key of C, it means it's taking the notes from the C scale to create that song. But we're going to start to figure out the formula. So we're going to start on C. Now, as you notice, all of the notes on the piano keyboard, you have black and white notes. The distance between each one of these notes, either black or white, is an interval of 1/2 step. So the distance is 1/2 step. So if you have 2 half steps, that equals 1 step, or a whole step. So starting on C, the distance between C and the next note up, which is D, is a 1/2 step and another 1/2 step, a whole step. So write down W for whole. Okay, so that's a whole step. The next note of the C scale is E, so the distance between D and E is a 1/2 step, a whole step. The next note of the C scale is the F. So look at this, there's no black note between, so that is considered a 1/2 step. So far you have whole step, 1/2 step, so I have written down in your paper W, W, H for a whole half. Whole half, okay? Then the distance between the F and the G is also a whole step. The distance between G and A is also a whole step. The distance between A and B is also a whole step. And the distance between B and C is a 1/2 step. So your formula is whole step, 1/2 step, 1/2 step, whole step, 1/2 step, 1/2 step, 1/2 step. Now maybe in school or somewhere you've learned, like with guitar or with a band instrument, that there was just a 1/2 step between E and F and between B and C. Now you know why, because that's the way it looks on the piano. Okay, so there's your C scale based on that formula. Let's try that on the G scale, and we'll go into this more in your chapter on the G scale. But let's start on G. Okay, and we're going to use that formula. Whole step, so the next note is A. Whole step, the next note is B. 1/2 step, the next note is C. Whole step, whole step, whole step. So you have to go half to half. So that makes the F sharp half step. So the notes in the G scale are, because we've applied that formula of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Okay? Okay, let's go back to the C scale. Now what I want you to do is just to take note, or you write it down or take note. Each note of the scale has a certain degree, okay? Or the number of the note. And you're going to have 8 of them. And it's pretty easy. The first note, C, is number 1. D is number 2. E is number 3. F is number 4. G is number 5. A is number 6. B is number 7. And the other C octave is 8. So keep that in mind. Each note of the scale has a number or a degree. And I'll be referring back to the degrees of the scale in other lessons. And it's real important to understand that, because that's a basis of a lot of how we play chord piano. So what you want to do when you're practicing your C scale, and you should practice all your scales a lot, because once you get familiar with the scales, then you're going to be able to improvise. And the easy way to practice the C scale, the way to practice it, with your right hand, would you go 1, 2, 3, cross your thumb under, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you come back down the same way that you went up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Then with the left hand, you're going to do it backwards. Starting on the C, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, then come back down. 1, 2, 3, cross your thumb under. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let me show you again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put your 3 finger over. And coming down. 1, 2, 3. Put your thumb under your 3 finger. And the same with the right. Cross your thumb under. So have fun practicing this scale, and we're going to move right on to our chord lesson, and you'll need to know your scales in order to know your chords.